So the first topic I wanted to talk about this weekend is just IBDW. I think he's one of the few summit winners. It's among a hall of great players that have won. I don't know off the top of my head who's won a summit. I think Armada, HBox, Mango, Muti King, Axe. Drawing blanks on certain people. I'm sure there might be one or two other people, but yeah, it's a really big accomplishment, and I think overall, just want to just break down. I think overall, just like talk about IBDW as a player, and we'll just have this as a background. I will move my head to this side, but what is like IBDW's like profile as a player? Like, what have I observed over the years? What does his legacy look like, and like what does he do from here now that he's like won a really big event? Not big in entrance, but overall in terms of it being a really difficult, hard event where a lot of top players were there. Everybody but Plup pretty much was here. But I think IBDW, I think if Plup and IBDW played against each other, I would say that IBDW is probably the favorite based on recent history and just how good he is against Sheik. So going back to IBDW's like profile as a player, I think, if Armada and Leffen just completely disappeared in 2018, I would say that IBDW is the continuation and evolution of the Armada Leffen kind of framework. And what I mean by this is I don't want to oversimplify this, like similar to like East Coast plays the gameplay and West Coast plays the player, but kind of the hierarchies of thought that the IBDW, or Cody for short, I'm just going to use Cody, is being able to solve situations with really solid game plans, and being able to have a pretty good solution or a series of decisions in certain positions and situations. So Cody, a very game plan oriented player. You can see in his gameplay, and that's something that Leffen and Armada have historically been really good at relative to the field, is when they play against a character, they have really solid foundations and ideas of how to play against the character. I think one of the interesting things that you'll see, like for example from Armada, when he plays Fox versus Marth, that period of time he would camp top platform, because that is a spot that Marth has a hard time dealing with. Is what if Fox is just kind of hovering and reacting to Marth making a mistake or overextending and then punishing? So there are a lot of default positions that Leffen and Armada will take that just invalidate the other character. And you see this a lot with Cody as well. You saw it in the set against Yoshi, and whenever Cody plays against a mid-tier character, you see how his playstyle revolves on abusing ranges that the opposing character can't contest. And so probably, the commentator said it's why he's one of the best players to play against, like a player like Amsa, where he's playing a mid-tier character that has limitations and all that fun stuff overall. So what you'll see, the other component of like Leffen and Armada is that they have generally clean tech skill and gameplay. It's not to say that they're not technical, but whatever they decide to implement in tournament is going to be something that they know how to execute consistently. So you're not going to see IBDW or Cody, Leffen, or Armada go balls to the wall with tech skill that they don't think they could. That's A, practical, and B, also consistent. And so one of the hallmarks of Cody's gameplay is his consistency. I would also say he's also a grinder. Another characteristic of Armada and Leffen, he just grinds the game. Really, studies. Talks to people. Really tries to dissect the game as much as he can. So although we meme and say like I be doing work, but he is really just a really big grinder. Really wants to have kind of a perfectionistic approach to the game, and really, like, I think he's one of the few players today actually that like understands the game at a very solid foundational level, and he can also talk about it. So that's him as a player. With the Leffen and Armada playstyle, it is kind of interesting, right? Some of the flaws that can come from that kind of train of thought is that there is not always a strong aggression factor with just abusing ranges, where because the style that Armada and Leffen usually used to do, and I think Leffen's evolving a little bit more, is by abusing a range, you're not really fully taking initiative. You're just going to a spot and you're just saying, hey, like I want you to outplay me to get the hit, but it's not really taking initiative in many spots. And so it's not to say that they won't approach, but like a lot of the Armada, Cody, or I'll just say Cody at this point, a lot of Cody's, kind of neutral is going to be based on like if it is safe, if it is guaranteed, if I know my opponent can't do anything here, then I will run in. And but there isn't often raw aggression angle where if both characters have tools to skirmish, like Cody will tend to not skirmish. He'll choose to reset and find a favorable position for himself. Um, so I would say that's his style. I think that style is a very strong style. You see Armada and Leffen have won years with it, and to an extent, also Hungrybox could also fit in this mold as a the way that he thinks about the game. Um, I think it requires that you have. It requires the style doesn't work for everybody because it is actually pretty high execution. You have to make sure you know your punishes really well. You have to know the matchups really well in terms of what is your opponent's character capable of, and like where are your windows of vulnerability against the character, and where are your windows where you can just invalidate the character. So the execution of it does require a lot of fundamental knowledge of interactions. The reason why I say it could be a little bit more difficult is because there's a poker term called exploitative, right? Where when we like rather than abuse ranges, sometimes at lower to mid-level play, you might notice that your opponent has a really bad forward smash spamming habit, or that they like to roll a lot. So rather than play a range and go like, hey, like do something about it, you might just be like, hey, like I just every time I walk up to him, I'm just going to grab him, right? And so granted, not all reads are that easy, but a lot of lower and mid-level players will just default to not learning matchups because so many players have flaws and very bad habits that are punishable. And that's like actually like how I got so good back in the old days of Melee when people weren't as good, is because despite the fact that I didn't have good tech skill, and my matchup knowledge was okay. Like there were matchups I was definitely very experienced in, but I didn't really study the matchups. But I would abuse bad habits and recognize patterns in my opponent. It's not to say that Cody and Armada and all those players don't do that, but sometimes there's something to be said of rather than go for this absolute guarantee that requires 10 things, 10 bits of knowledge to know, like you can just pick the exploitable habit that your opponent does over and over again. So definitely not an easy play style. Definitely requires an extreme amount of knowledge. So yeah, the interesting thing that also came to me this tournament, and when we go into these live events, you kind of saw it talked about, but you can kind of see it in their gameplay that playing LAN and playing in person just is a very completely different mindset than playing online. And I know Cody talked about just laughing and having a good time, and then you saw Zane who struggled, and you can kind of tell in his gameplay that it almost felt like he was distracted by the weight of expectations that come with, being the best player and having to fulfill those expectations. Where I think when you play high level Melee or high level anything, like you want your mind to be as clear as possible, because that's what it will demand of you to win against a really good opponent, is that you need to be like in a natural flow state to think about like how do I execute, press my buttons correctly, and read the situations. But I think there is something in the back of our mind. It's like a subconscious thing of like recognizing game state and flow and being able to read patterns. And that's how you see people get those next level reads. And you're just like, oh, wow, like he's just shutting down everything. And it's because you're just in such a natural flow of being able to figure out what your opponent's doing now and like what they're going to do next. I never really felt that at any point Zane was at that level of flow at any point of these, like especially last couple of sets. It just felt like he was playing scared, timid, defensive, and just defaulting to just very B plus esque level options most of the set. So really impressed by Cody's mindset. I know historically he's kind of, you can tell by his tweets, and I don't want to overly psychoanalyze, but he's one to very quickly go down on himself, or if his controller is wrong, or if there's a setting wrong, or if he didn't sleep right, to very quickly go to Twitter and just let it affect him. So great that he just kind of ignored all that for this event. I think the interesting thing for me for Cody moving forward, definitely very happy for him. Definitely a very capable player, really strong fundamentals, good punish game, great execution. Mindset was there. It's going to be interesting to see if he can carry this through. Probably the biggest question I have is now that he's won an event, if he keeps winning, like what happens in a universe where now like you have this internal monologue with yourself where it's like, oh, I'm expected to win. Why am I not winning? And I think everybody, whether you're a low level player, mid level player, high level player, has like encountered this in some point of your career where you may play against a player that you normally beat, and then something wrong happens where you get gimped, you lose a game, and you're just like, wait, like I should be winning, and then you play this inner monologue with yourself of like what's happening as opposed to putting your full mental resources into the match itself. And that's where I think play can fall apart. So, not to say that will happen to Cody, but I know that's a pretty big stepping stone for a lot of competitors is what kind of happens when you're expected to win as opposed to being the underdog and having nothing to lose. So, that's probably the next big test. Cody's definitely a very driven player, very capable, have nothing but good things to say. I will end this Tafo talk on Cody though with just this one thing of I'm still 1-0 against him. He's beaten Mango. He's beaten Zane. But he hasn't beaten Tafo yet in tournament, and Tafo's beaten him. But all steps aside, I'm just really happy for him.